Hi, welcome to Get In, the connected vehicle podcast from BlackBerry. I'm your host, Steve Kovsky. With this series, we'll be diving into what the future of transportation might look like. And today I have a guest who is deeply embedded in creating that future. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be on the podcast, and also, happy to introduce myself. My name is Andrei Iordache. I'm a senior industry solutions manager at Here Technologies, and actually my focus area is around automated drive. And this, as you said, this very much relates to the future. So happy to discuss with you what the future actually holds for the industry.
One of the things we like to do is start by going back in time and talking about sort of the first time you got behind the wheel and how that experience has changed from then to now, and also how that early involvement with automobiles may have changed the trajectory of your career.
Well, that's actually a very interesting question, and in a way, it kind of like defines my career from the first touch point to where we got today. I've always been super passionate about cars, but actually my fascination and my admiration with cars actually pivoted into new directions over time. So, funny enough, being super passionate, I actually got my first real job in 2007, 2008 as an automotive journalist. So I had the chance to, to observe the industry, to talk to the executives. But back then, it was all about the powertrain. It was all about the transmission. It was all about the mechanical elements of the vehicle that were exciting for the people. It was actually very little discussion about software capabilities, and actually the car itself was a sort of a standalone entity that didn't integrate that much with other devices or, with your mobility options. Maybe some Bluetooth streaming here and there was just coming up, maybe some navigation into the dashboard, but still the car was the car and everything else was separately. And actually nowadays, with electrification and software, actually I find in a way that, the fascination with the mechanical parts, with the powertrains, with the transmissions actually has decreased over time. And it's more about, how should I say, in a way, it's more about kind of like the software elements and how they're evolving the software-defined vehicle that's getting people's attention. And I'm saying this, not just from my own perspective, but sometimes it happens that I'm talking to some former journalist colleagues, and even the guys, what they were the most kind of hardcore petrol heads. Now we kind of end up discussing not about combustion engine technology, but more about kind of the digital experience of the vehicle. So I would say that in this time frame that it happened that I started in the industry, and up to this point, we kind of witnessed what I would call the digitalization of mobility in vehicles themselves, but also in the wider mobility. So now, you don't need to, let's say, plan your route from A to B and have like X maps. You just put it into you put your destination in your navigation system, and the routing is automatically computed from A to B, right? Also the same with other mobility options, right? You don't need to kind of like whistle or hail a taxi. You just provide them your location and they will come and pick you up and take you to your destination. The same also with public transportation, right? The time where you need to know the timetable by heart and you don't know what your options are gone, right? Now you just, again, provided your desired destinations, check your options, see what's your departure and arrival times, and you are set to go.
It's a really exciting time and a lot of change going on. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I spoke yesterday to one of the journalists at Motor Trend about how they're an iconic brand in automotive journalism, and they're changing very much in terms of how they view cars, how they evaluate cars, because their Car of the Year is a very prestigious award. And they're trying to learn how to judge the quality of electric vehicles, and soon they'll have to judge the quality of autonomous vehicles. How soon are we going to see autonomous vehicles when we call a taxi, the taxi arrives, but there's no humans in it?
Yeah, I think that's, if we're thinking about let's say the global scale, this type of question might not have the same answer everywhere. So in certain parts of the world, we may be seeing already, in San Francisco, you have robo-taxis or autonomous shuttles that can come and pick you up. In other parts of the world, probably it will still take decades before we get there. So when it comes to autonomy, what we are seeing sort of two development paths. So one is what I would personally call the evolutionary path, where your vehicles, the car that you own, has more automated driving features. So you have the adaptive cruise control, now you have a highway pilot, maybe then you have an autonomous parking, but it's all done kind of like in incremental steps, to increase your driver experience. It's not about, replacing you as the driver. Is making sure that these routine tasks, so making sure that the things that you may not enjoy that much in driving, like finding a parking spot or cruising on the highway, are taken care by the automated driving system. So I would say that's one element which is happening, which is actually growing. We are seeing a lot of level 2+ vehicles, a lot of level 3 vehicles on the market. And I think this is, from the perspective of your discussion with the journalist, this is probably now kind of like the topic that they are talking mostly. Everybody's benchmarking the ultra cruise versus autopilot versus the system from BMW versus Mercedes. That's what kind of like fascinates. They're discussing less about the 6-cylinder from an OEM versus the 4-cylinder from another OEM, if I can make this parallel. But that's, if I can, let's say, if I can put it like this, was one path. There's the second path, which you alluded to. It has to do with replacing the driver, actually. So in mobility services, making sure that you don't need a driver, or actually these autonomous shuttles can actually take you from A to B without you being inside. This is also happening, right? In certain parts of the world more than in other parts of the world. But the difference with this is that they are starting with these use cases of autonomy in very, let's say, geo-fenced areas, and only there. So what I mean by this, if we would take a autonomous shuttle from somewhere from San Francisco and we will put it in Paris, it won't be able to handle the reality. That's actually a solution developed only for that specific geo-fenced area, and it will always operate there as a service. While your vehicle, for example, may not have the same level of full autonomy, but it's actually designed in a way that can take you cross countries and cross cities. So these would be, let's say, the two paths that we're seeing. It may actually take some time until these two are actually coming together and are meeting, but they will kind of like coexist for a while, at least, in the mobility landscape.
You bring up some really interesting points, and I want to talk more about geographies, because I was comparing a video of an autonomous vehicle in San Francisco versus one in a city in China. And it's completely different. China was so much more chaotic. There were so many more pedestrians and vehicles of every kind coming out of every area of the roadway at all times. And much less consciousness about staying on your side of the road, or even in the road or off the road. But before we do that, I think I'd like you to talk a little bit about HERE Technologies, because many consumers might not be familiar with that. They're familiar with the brands that own and operate that entity, but they may not know exactly who it is and what it does. Could you tell me a little bit about the parentage of HERE Technologies and what it's trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so HERE Technologies is actually a company in the space of location technology and location information with actually quite some history. The company was actually set up in 1985, and let's say it operated under the name or under the brand of Navtech. Still, many people know us as Navtech, but actually the company and the industry evolved quite a lot. So in the beginning, let's say Navtech was the first company actually to put the maps for a navigation system in production in the early 90s, I believe. So that was one of the, let's say, the first milestones of the company. And after that, in the navigation space, we're actually quite known, and this evolved. Since 2004, another dimension to our location solutions for automotive appeared. We actually, in 2004, created the first ADAS map for a vehicle to use it for adaptive cruise control. After that, the ADAS map, there was around 2015. So the company, being Navtech, was at one point acquired by Nokia, and it became kind of like the location and commerce part of Nokia. But in 2015, the German OEMs actually seeing how the world is evolving and how their location needs might evolve with automated driving and autonomous driving and ADAS. They decided, so BMW, Mercedes, and Audi, to join forces and actually acquire what back then was already named as here to be able to be a supplier for mapping. So the ownership changed, but our, let's say, how we supply the industry did not change, because we actually continued working with the rest of the industry. So it wasn't something that it became exclusive to the 3 OEMs. What changed though, and this was something that we are seeing already, if in the past, when we're thinking about maps as being let's say a static piece of software that you install in the production vehicle on the production line and you update it with physical memory disks, this actually changed. So from 2015, from 2016 to be more precise, we actually made our location database available through an open platform. So we actually changed towards a location platform, and this is basically what today most of our customers leverage to pull in the mapping, the dynamic services, and all the other assets that we're having for their location use cases.
So Andrei, tell me the companies that are behind Here Technologies, and then let's dig a little bit more into the difference between map-based and location-based. I'm not sure that everyone understands. I'm not sure I understand it. So let's go there. But first, you mentioned some of those iconic brands that are investors and owners of Here Technology. Could you list them for us?
So yes. So I was mentioning in the earlier question that actually here is so the 3 German OEMs, Audi, BMW, and Mercedes, started investing in 2016, seeing actually the benefit of location technology for let's say for their development in navigation, but mostly also in ADAS and automated driving. Over time, actually, let's say more investors actually came on board. So I think in 2017, 2018, we got new tech investors, so Intel and Continental and Bosch. And in 2020, we actually got investors from other industries like Mitsubishi Corporation and NTT Data, just for the simple fact that we are actually seeing that the usage of location and let's say the lines between industry are kind of like overlapping. So when you are talking about automated driving, you are also talking about transport and logistics. This is also a segment that not just OEMs are concerned, but also the ones that are developing solutions for transport and logistics. Also, when you are talking about dynamic services, when you are talking about content, this is something also very interesting for like telco technologies like V2X. So now we have a very diverse set of investors that kind of like reflect in a way the, let's say, the importance, but also the appeal of location for various industries.
That ties into the meaning of location versus mapping. And for some of us, that's a little hazy. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So I would say that although I don't think there's a standard definition, there's no kind of like right or wrong way to look at it or answer for this. I would say the following. So the maps are one element of location. And when it comes to location technology or to location services, the map itself is kind of like the foundational element, is the one that shows a digital representation of the road environment. Let's put it like this. But there are other elements in addition to maps, and sometimes the world might be changing faster. Things like traffic information, things like hazard warnings on the road, or even let's say weather information at specific location. These are elements that given how the map is, you will not be able to kind of like code them or layer them in a map. So this is how we would, let's say, call location services that actually work together with the map, but provide the updated in real time or even in near real time latency what's happening on the road. So these two, I would say location technology on one hand would be the mapping, and then would be the dynamic services that complement the mapping.
It's interesting to me, on the wall behind me are these 15th century maps of part of the British Isles. And the surface of the planet is the same for the most part as it was in that time, but it's a really chaotic, messy place. And the science of being able to traverse vehicles around that geography, to me, is just sort of amazing. So what are some of the technological advances that you're taking advantage of? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it cloud computing, edge computing? What are some of the things that are really key to making this work?
Yeah, that's actually a very good observation and actually a very good discussion point. As creating maps and creating a digital representation of the environment is actually not a one-time goal. You can, the moment you think, okay, we've done it, there's something changing. So actually, it's a continuous process that you have to, to keep going, and you have to feed in to make sure that your representation on a map is actually the same as the representation of the real world. I think this was when you had these historic maps. This was probably updated maybe tens of years, and it was like a very slow process. So it took a lot of manual work. Digital mapping also started in a way like this. So was a lot of kind of like manual work and survey done by humans on the road environment. But because actually the requirements, but also the, let's say, the means for mapping actually have evolved over time. Now we're getting to a point where we have the foundation. So the map, kind of like our global map, will stay the same. But what we need to kind of like continuously work and bring updates is on the things that they are changing. Sometimes there might be construction areas, there might be lanes, there might be new speed limits. There might be, let's say, you name it, whatever would change and would make, your what you had yesterday would make kind of like redundant today if you have not updated it. So from that perspective, when it comes to maintaining and updating it, we are actually leveraging multiple technology and also multiple data sources. So on our hand, we have our own survey vehicles, the ones with kind of like lidars and cameras and super advanced that go on the road. These are very good, for whenever it comes to build new content and whenever it comes to very high quality content. But even with a fleet which I would say we have a pretty big fleet because we have a pretty long history, it's very difficult, to kind of like keep everything in sync with the things that are changing on the road. So from that perspective, we're also leveraging other data sources. These data sources could be vehicle sensor data, so information coming from vehicles, prop data coming from, let's say, movement of vehicles and goods, satellite data, third-party data, governmental data. So they're all together, brought in with because they all have certain types of data sources. They have, let's say, their strengths, but they also have their weaknesses. So from that perspective, leveraging so many data sources, we try to provide the most complete mix to keep reality, accurately represented into our location services, or actually also into our map. Now the question becomes, when you have that much of data, and I think we are producing more than kind of like 1 terabytes of data every single day, how do you actually process it? So this processing, of course, requires actually a lot of AI and machine learning in the background to be able to make sure that the information that we're coming from a specific vehicle, if there's a speed limit, is actually consistent with the information that we might be having from a different sources, or let's say the lanes that we are seeing from a certain type of source are actually aligned with satellite imagery, and the two actually overlap. Imagine that the world is actually a vast environment. So without leveraging AI and machine learning into these processes, it wouldn't work. I have to say, there is still also instances where sometimes, the reality might be so puzzling that we need to have, quality engineers and check it there. So at the end of the day, I'd probably say, that to have the process that we have, and to supply the customers how they actually need to be supplied, it's actually a mix of multiple sources, a mix of AIs, but also sometimes having people, let's say, assisting the AI and making sure that what we're getting from the AI is actually making sense.
A lot of the heavy lifting, I think, is now happening on the vehicle itself. And let's talk about some of the developments in the vehicle. You've mentioned V2X, which I think is vehicle to other vehicles, to infrastructure, to what are they communicating with, and what are some of the key software developments and technological developments that are making this possible and really bringing the connected car not simply to life, but making it so relevant and important to transportation going forward?
Yeah, there are actually two major trends that we are seeing in the space of mobility and automotive that basically excite us because they come up with high potential synergies with location technology. So the first trend is actually what I would call the evolution of vehicle architectures towards kind of like from separate ECUs to more centralized and more zonal architectures that actually allow the OEMs to develop much more complex functionalities between domains. This also comes hand in hand with, I think, something that BlackBerry does quite well, is basically operating systems. I think there is still much more that can be extracted from the vehicle, and many more functions can actually be controlled with these centralized, you might say, vehicle architecture, but also with operating systems. What I mean by this is that historically we had kind of like the navigation was sitting in its own domain, and then we had driving assistance, and then maybe we have automated driving. And actually, in the beginning, they were not too much connected. They were, everybody operating in its own kind of like own space. But these multiple systems can actually benefit from location information, and the more these domains become virtualized instead of kind of like separated by hardware, the higher the potential is. And let me give you an example that hopefully clarifies it. So let's say that you are driving an EV, right? And you are running low on the battery. What actually typically happens is that you have to find the charging station that's within your remaining driving range. You have to make sure that it's available at the time you've done the search. But by the time you actually got to the charging station, you probably have been praying to make sure that the charging station is still available. So that means, treating kind of like the battery, the powertrain, the navigation, and the infrastructure as very separate domains. There is still, let's say, there will still be an element of planning that has to be done, but there's also an element of luck to make sure that you are not getting to the charging station and it was occupied. Actually, what could happen with with this communication of location between the vehicle systems and between the vehicle systems and infrastructure, the following thing could actually happen. So the vehicle will know when it's running low on battery, find the charging station, recommend the charging station, and also estimate your achievable range based on your driving style, based on the road information if you're driving uphill or downhill, and come up with the estimated time of arrival to the charging station. Based on this estimated time of the estimated time of arrival to the charging station, this one could actually be communicated to the charging station to make sure that you are reserving your charging spot when you exactly get there. So this is kind of like an example where, an experience that you don't know what will happen just by exchanging information between domains and having this location information exchange between the vehicle and the infrastructure, and also kind of like back. It makes sure that, you are getting there, you will be charging, and then you'll be on your way. So the second trend that we're actually seeing is the collective perception of vehicles, devices, and smart sensors in the infrastructure. And this is, we've been talking already, right? Having this digital representation of the road environment is actually key for the mobility of the future. But maintaining the digital infrastructure requires, this fusion of multiple data sources. And as I said, in our map making, we are already leveraging multiple sources, but scale, you never have enough scale, right? So if you really want to cover like the entire planet and the entire road classes and everything, industry actually needs to come together. So you have the OEMs that are, let's say, owning and operating the vehicles, but then you also have the technological enablers that can actually help them extract the information that's relevant, provide it to developers. And you might say that from that perspective, we could be a developer of location, and then get back a service or get back a location service or any other customer service that actually benefits from the data that is being crowdsourced and pooled across multiple OEMs, across vehicles and devices, across smart sensors in the infrastructure, you name it. I think that this is something that we are seeing the first steps now, but it's something that actually needs to happen at a much bigger scale to enable an autonomous world from everyone.
So, Andrei, these trends that you've talked about is very exciting. I'm interested in the roles that various partners are playing, such as BlackBerry with HERE Technologies, we are partnering in this. What are the areas of that software stack and that technology model that we're seeing come to fruition here?
So if I'm referring, if I start with my second trend, the one with collective perception, I would say that this is actually a major development for the industry. And we know that vehicles and connected vehicles and automated driving vehicles are becoming, let's say, mobile data centers on wheels, if you want to call it. But the extracting the data, and actually we are seeing it today, not kind of like there's still a lot of noise and there's still a lot of let's say a high amount of data is not exactly usable. So from that perspective, having platforms that actually can extract data from multiple sensors, from multiple actuators from the vehicles, and is actually key. Is actually key, to have platforms and to have standards that can enable this happen to scale. Because if it might be, sometimes one OEM might have an idea, the second OEM might have another idea, and they might, come up with their own way of working and extracting and analyzing data. But at the end of the day, as I said, it's all about scale. This one, the data, in my view, sometimes I'm also seeing that if software is becoming the new engine, actually data is becoming the new fuel. And the thing with the fuel is that, also like we see for combustion engines, if every OEMs would be having its own way of doing fuel and that fuel would work only with their engine, actually we wouldn't be able to drive, right? Because it will always be scarcity of fuel. But once you have common standards, once you have, let's say, the experts and platforms that actually can leverage this data, provide it to the developers, and the developers, develop the services and location-based content that every vehicle can actually leverage, or not just vehicles in cars, but also, buses, you name it, scooters, bicycles, pedestrians. This is where we're actually getting to an autonomous world for everyone. So from that perspective, I think, any initiative that helps the industry and any initiatives that the industry is getting involved into leveraging the data from the vehicle, making sense, extracting it, localizing it, and turning it into useful insights, it's very welcome.
Okay, Andrei, you've given us a lot to think about. And before I let you go, I want to ask you, what do you think should really excite consumers about what's coming in the next, say, 5 years? And why is this so important? Why should automakers be excited about these coming changes?
That's actually a very good ending question. And I would probably say that consumers per se might be less excited, as we are, the tech experts in the technology. But I'm sure that they'll be very much excited into the benefits of these changes. So we've been talking about the digitalization of mobility, but also with automation. So these two forces together actually have the capacity, to make transportation more efficient, reduce delays, reduce uncertainty where you're getting to certain places. Also, reduce less delays and in traffic can also mean less emissions, which is a very relevant topic of the day. And at the end of the day, it's also about less accidents, less casualties. And this can all be, let's say, enhanced with better knowledge of your environment, better knowledge of what's happening beyond your line of sight, what to expect, where is a traffic jam, where is a potential accident, where is a danger. There's something on your route. How do you exactly, how can you take an alternative route to make sure that you're not stuck in there? You are reaching, your end destination. Where is the parking spot? Or even better, if your car has the capability, you just activate automated parking and you let it kind of like go on its own on the parking garage, park itself, wait for you, and come back. So these are all, let's say, exciting elements that, let's say, address the needs of the consumers, for more free time, cleaner air, and also safety on the roads. We are seeing now that the life of the human beings, it's becoming it's becoming actually a very important topic. And also industry itself is making big progresses to make sure that all of these three areas are supporting the Vision Zero.
From the automaker point of view, what is driving them toward these? You mentioned necessity and in some ways inevitability. Are they embracing this future, and how do they see it benefiting them?
Yeah, certainly. So I think on the automotive side, there is excitement for the technology, but there's also the necessity side of it. OEMs, we know that they need to, let's say, be putting on the road cleaner, more efficient, smarter vehicles. There's both push from the regulation side, but there is also, customer acceptance. We are seeing that customers do value vehicles that are smarter, vehicles that are cleaner, vehicles that are quieter. I think where certain OEMs have shown that this is kind of like the way to go forward. And I think every single OEM that we know is working along these three coordinates. And I previously mentioned the Vision Zero, and that most of the OEMs would actually have in their strategy zero emission, zero delays, and zero casualties.
Okay. That's a future I can buy into. And thank you so much, Andrei, for the contribution you're making to help us get there sooner. I thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been a pleasure. And yes, I'm very excited also how the industry is actually coming together and supporting the OEMs and supporting the consumers with this future that we all want to have.
Well, that's the end of our episode for today, but if you'd like to get more information on the topics or our guest, check out blackberry.com/podcast. Get in, the Connected Vehicle Podcast from BlackBerry is available wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with our latest episodes.